Hello everyone and welcome to Programming and Access 2013, the Advanced course. My name is Steve Bishop, and in today's video we're going to be talking about preparing your Microsoft SQL Server tables for use in Access. So we did the conversion process, we did the import-export process in the last video, and brought those tables over from Access and put them into our SQL Server. But some of you may have noticed that there's an awful lot more tables now in our SQL Server than what were on our Access database. So if you look here, for example, Customers Extended is not a table that exists in our Access database. So to some of you who are keen observers, you may have noticed this. You may have noticed these extra tables, and you may have also noticed that they are the same name as a query. So we have Customers Extended is a table, but it's a query in our Access database. And essentially what happened is during the conversion process, some of the items that we selected were these queries. Now you could have, of course, unchecked those during the import-export process, but I figured I'd go ahead and leave that in here just so you guys can see how to delete a table after you've done this. Because some of you may just, be lazy and you get the results of what I got over here with all of the tables that were queries. So it's pretty simple to do. If you want to delete these tables that were created because they were queries in Access, is just select them so that they're highlighted and then press the delete key on your keyboard and then go ahead and click on the OK button. And that's all there is to it. So I'm going to go through this list here of tables and compare them to what's in my Access database and go ahead and remove those that aren't necessary. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video here while I go ahead and remove all of these, and I'll come back in just a moment. Those tables from SQL Server that did not exist in my Access database. And now what we need to do is we need to go ahead and do some changes of the properties over here on our SQL tables to help them match up to what is in our Access database. And the most obvious discrepancy is if I open up the Customers table here in the Design view, and the way you do that is just to right-click on the table you want to open and just go to Design. Okay. If I look in the Design view, you'll see that there is no indicator here that the ID column is my primary key. So if I look in the Design view over here in Access, you can see there's a key symbol next to the column. So the way that you set a column to be the primary key in SQL Server is exactly the same way you would have done it in Access. You just need to select the columns. You can select one or more columns that you want to comprise of the primary key. And in the margin over here on the left, you're just going to right-click and then select Set Primary Key. And that's all you have to do to set that as the primary key of the table. Now the next thing I need to show you is that the data type was converted from auto number to int. Okay. Now auto number is really it's a data type in Access called auto number, but really if you think about it, all that auto numbering is the integer data type with some special properties that increase the value by 1 for each new record. Well, SQL Server does not have a data type called auto number, nor does it have one that's similar to auto number that you can just select and it'll automatically know to increase the values. But what you can do is you can go to the column that you want to have that you want to set to automatically increment. And if you go to the Properties section, I'm just going to go ahead and expand this out a little bit. If I go down the properties list of the column for ID, you'll see there's this property called Identity Specification. And right now it's set to No. If I expand this out by clicking on the little arrow next to it, you'll see that I have some more options. One of them is Identity. I'm going to select where it says No, and I need to click on the drop down and change this to Yes. And once I do that, you'll see Identity Increment and Identity Seed become available as properties that we can set. Identity Seed is basically where we're going to start the numbering process from. What's the first number in the sequence? And that would be 1. Identity Increment is how big do you want to increment each new record by. So if this was 2, for example, then the first record would be 1, then the next record would be 3. and then the next record after that would be 5, and then 7, and so on. So by default, 1 for an identity increment and 1 for identity seed is pretty much the universal default. It's kind of what we already have set up over here in the customers table over here in our Access database. So that's what we're going to go ahead and set it as for our identity specification in the SQL Server. Okay, so I've got my primary key set here. I've changed the identity increment and seed. I've set it as the identity, and I'm going to go ahead and click on the save now to save those changes to the table, and you'll get this little warning message. If you didn't, then count yourself lucky, okay? But if you did get this message, like 99% of you, then what that means is that if we read the message here, as a matter of fact, it just says saving changes is not permitted. The changes you have made require the following tables to be dropped and recreated. So what this means is that the changes that we made to the table, more specifically this identity specification and the primary key here, that means that the table actually needs to be completely dropped from the database and recreated and all of the data re-imported back into it. Now that sounds like a pretty daunting task, right? But luckily, this is really just a single setting that needs to be changed in Microsoft SQL Server. So I'm just going to go up to the Tools menu here, and I'm going to go down to Options. And under the Designers section, there's the Table and Database Designers subsection, and under here you'll see this checkbox that says Prevent Saving Changes that Require Table Recreation. You can go ahead and uncheck that, and that will remove that requirement. It's some sort of safety requirement that Microsoft decided was a good idea to leave in as the default, and it's been that way for a while. I'm not really sure why. I guess they're erring on the side of caution, but it's really an annoying message because, of course, I want to drop the table and recreate it and re-import all the data. I'd love for you to do that automatically for me. So let's go ahead and do that, right? So now when I click on the Save button, after I've changed that setting, you'll see that it's going to take a little bit of time to basically drop the customers table. It's going to recreate it and re-import all of that data automatically for you, and you don't have to do anything. So that's really, really nice. Okay, so our customers table has been changed, right? Now let's move on to this employee privileges, because I just wanted to show you. This is the same process. You'll notice that the access table here has a composite key, which basically means these two fields combined make up the primary key. So if we go to the employee privileges table, let me just move this over here, and we right click on it, go to the design view, we once again don't see the primary key in here at all. What we can do is just select both of these two rows together, right click in the margin, set primary key, and you can see it does the same thing as what we did over here with the Access database. So that's pretty easy and straightforward. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save those changes. Now, one last thing I need to show you here before we can really move on is there is a bit of a problem with a field called a bit field. In Access, the data type is known as a yes/no. And if I go to the products table here and go into the design view, you'll see this discontinued field is set to yes/no, and it has a default value of no. Okay, so default values are not brought over during the process. Okay, so when you do the import export, this default value is not set. So that's another one of those properties on each one of the columns in each one of the tables that you're going to need to go through and make sure you have set up properly. I know that's a bit of a daunting task, but the way that you do that is I'm just going to go to the products table here. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and close this one down. Okay, I'm going to open up the design view for products. And I'm going to scroll down here, and you'll see discontinued has been changed to this data type called a bit. Okay, so a bit, for those of you who probably already know this, a bit is just a single value of either 0 or 1. It's also called a boolean. Okay, it's just a single yes or no, true or false, that sort of thing. Well, in SQL Server, this is stored literally as 0 or 1. 0 being false, 1 being true. You may also recall that when we were going through this in Access during the basic series, that Access considers this to be a -1 to be true and 0 being false. So this may take you a moment to think about, to realize that some of the VBA code you may have in your database, you may need to start going through and changing it to say, instead of checking to see if it's a -1, check to see if it's a +1. Okay, so some of you may be going, uh-oh, I got to go through all my VBA code and fix that. And you're right. If you are currently doing a comparison to see if the true or false is instead a -1 or a 0, you may need to change that comparison to check if it's a -1 and change it to +1. Okay, so I've got a bit field here for discontinued. In order to set the default to no, I don't know why it keeps doing that. In order to set the default value to no for this discontinued field on my SQL Server, again, if you go to the column properties here, you'll see this default value or binding. And you can just go ahead and set the value to, in this particular case, I'm going to set it to 0, which is false or no in Access. Okay, so that's all I have to do in order to set that. Now, I also need to tell you another thing about bit fields, and I don't know why this hasn't been resolved yet, but it's something that's really annoying when you go through the conversion process, and it's something that's usually the last step that I have to do before I can start to link up these SQL tables over to my Access database. With bit fields, for some reason, you have to go through and force a conversion of any null values over to equal 0. So there's really two things at play here. If you have a these are two things that can really trip you up, okay? Number one, you need to go through, like I said, and find all the default value settings for all of the columns and all the tables, and you need to get those set up here, because if you don't, when you go through and you link up your Access tables or your SQL tables to your Access, you're going to have some problems adding new records because it won't know to set a default value in SQL Server. So that's really important. But the other thing is, with the bit fields, you have to write this really annoying query in order to fix a little glitch in the process. Sometimes, instead of being stored as 0, it gets stored as null, okay? So in Access, we may have a null value here for discontinued. You need to go ahead and add this. You need to change any potential null values to equal 0, or whatever the default is for that you're setting for that particular column. So in my particular case, the default value is 0 for this discontinued field. So anything that is currently null, I need to make sure that I go through and set any null values equal to the default value. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new query here. And for those of you who have seen the SQL queries, or the SQL part of my basic series, you're going to just simply do this. Update, and it's going to be products is the name of the table, right? And I'm going to set discontinued equal to 0, because that's the default value for the column. And I'm going to say where discontinued is null. So anywhere that you have a bit field, and especially if it has a requirement for a default, or it's set to allow nulls as false, you need to make sure that you go through this process, that anywhere there is currently a null, that you set its value to whatever the default value should be. And I can either go ahead and just click on the execute button here, and that will execute the entire the query that's on this screen, or I can select that particular section of the query that I want to run, and then just go ahead and click on the execute button, and that will go ahead and execute the query. So just make sure you do that. Even if you have values for every record on that table, you still need to go ahead and do this, okay? And so I went ahead and did that for this particular table, and that's all you need to do in order to get your your SQL tables ready to go. So there you go. If you have any more questions, please feel free to drop me your question in the comments section below this video. And again, as always, please don't forget to like, favorite, and subscribe. Thank you so much.